and let that get set up because it takes a couple moments with
All right.
Mr. and Mrs. YouTube to do it. Oh, goodness.
Well, I see Michael's name on the screen here.
Yeah, we got a couple people joining on. There's a couple people already watching the live stream too. And so if it looks like I'm distracted, it's because I'm probably looking at comments that are coming on YouTube and LinkedIn. And
you're totally fine. I only know Michael's, I think, from social, but like for years now, I feel like we've had conversations every now and again. So it's always nice to see a familiar name, even though I'd like to say familiar face, but we haven't like met. So it's hard to say that.
It's like a reunion at this point.
I feel like every event is I'm a serial lurker. Yeah, I feel like everything's a reunion for me at this point. I was like not well, everybody was kind of nowhere for 2 years, so.
Which was odd because out of all industries, insurance is so close knit, with very, enduring, long-lasting friendships. And so I can't imagine not seeing, your friendly professional community for 2 years and just putting that on hold and just.
Yeah. I mean, I did a lot of Zoom happy hours during that time. And it kind of opened me up to new communities in the insurance world. So I don't know. There were definitely some good things that came out of it from a relationship building aspect, but there is something to be said. Now all these reports are coming back about, in person versus virtual, and what does the future state of the workforce look like? And they're saying like true eye contact and human interaction is going to be one of those things that could very well be rare, but becomes your differentiator in an employment pool. So I don't know. We'll see. I mean, that's a whole other topic for a whole other discussion, but I don't know. I think it's a balance of both, and we're figuring out what that means.
And for everyone who didn't join this live or is watching it on YouTube, this is just another reason they should have joined, because of all of the great knowledge we're going to share. And on that note, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Looks like we have 10 people on YouTube. We might have some more people jumping on Zoom. I know Thursdays, it tends to be a great day for people to have some free time in their schedule, but we're also kind of getting into summer vacation and renewals. And I was talking with a carrier this morning and they're like, yeah, we're in the middle of rate changes right now. So it's never a quiet day in the insurance world. But hello, everyone. My name is Colby Tunick, and thank you all for joining today's webinar, regardless of how you're joining it, on how to make your agency management system work for you. Just some quick housekeeping before we begin. We will be recording this webinar. We will also be live streaming it, and it will be available on demand after. We ask that any participants keep their cameras and mics off for the duration. And then if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat or lurk in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to all of them before the end of today. And I'm joined by Oliva Schmitt, our amazing panelist, operations manager at Catalyst. A little bit about her. She's been in this industry for over 15 years, which means she's probably seen it all, spearheading sales at independent agencies and marketing for two major players on the vendor side. I think out of everyone I've had the opportunity to meet, she probably has one of the deepest understandings of all things insurance, holistically, operations, vendor, carrier. If you want to check out her podcast, Live Louder, she highlights women in insurance and leadership, and then she'll convert you to a fangirl of your own. Also, she loves coffee and being up at 5 a.m. And I am thrilled that she has decided to join us today. Thank you so much for being here, Olivia.
Well, thanks for the invite, Colby, and like the amazing introduction. I don't get intros like that. That's so fun. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
my kids do not don't give me that intro when I walk in the house. So, but I'm gonna have them watch this playback so that maybe they'll start doing it. Like when I walk in with all the groceries.
I recommend you do. Yeah, they can take out their trumpets and
Yeah, I think it's only fair.
It's only fair. And I want to start off by asking you, out of all of your time in the insurance industry, where have you kind of seen agency management systems evolve, and why is it still something we're here talking about today?
Oh boy. So, I mean, I started out on applied TAM, which was, I mean, for anybody that's been on it, it's actually a pretty popular system still. I mean, there's definitely some diehards out there with the applied TAM system, but it was very it was like this pixelated display. I mean, I think about it, I still have flashbacks of it. I could still navigate it if I had to, because you just don't forget those things when they're so ingrained in you. But it was like all these little picture icons, and you weren't quite sure what the pictures were, and there were text limitations. I mean, I think about some of the headaches that we had to deal with in TAM, and some of the stuff was just like the editability of certain forms within the system. It seemed like as more legal issues started to arise in the industry, there was certainly more control that was put inside the agency management system, inside its core functionality, and outside of the flexibility of the insurance agent. So they couldn't go in and make those modifications and things like that. But I think just, I used to log in through a terminal server. I feel like, I mean, I know I'm not super old, but at the same time, I don't even know if like most people have ever had to log in through a terminal server and deal with that kind of headache. So we were looking at longer data transfer times for information to go from our core server, which was in an office 45 minutes away from the location I worked in, and back, and all of this kind of silly stuff. And so, I mean, we certainly saw the emergence of the cloud-based system. Agency management systems started to just kind of put more emphasis on becoming a more accessible product, and really going through the painstaking process of figuring out what's user friendly to the majority. Obviously, you can't do it for everybody. What I like and what somebody else likes in an agency management system can be very different. But I think, we saw more integrations come into play in terms of agency management systems saying, hey, we have to be able to complement other products and services that agencies need to offer to their customers. And we need to figure out how to make their life easier while still making sure we're covering everybody from a legal standpoint. I think about real-time data transfers, and there's been a lot of different things that have happened over time. But there's still, the agency management system is still very much a part of what an agent needs to function. I mean, you see people saying, hey, I'm going to try and do this between Excel and Outlook and figure it out from there. And I think that maybe you can do that for a limited amount of time, but the agency management system is still core to the daily function of an agency from a customer service standpoint, from a legal protection standpoint, all of those good things. The insurance industry still very much operates on accord forms, and AMSs tend to be the warehouse of all of that information. So there's a lot of functions that they serve. They're not going to go away, but it's really a matter of how do we take what we know and all of these learnings and probably mistakes and stumbles. There's probably been AMS, all sorts of hurdles that they've had to try and jump over the last 15 years that we don't even know from a consumer standpoint. How do we take that and then make really meaningful change going forward? There's a ton of money that gets put into these agency management systems. And so utilizing that in a really thoughtful way that benefits everybody in the ecosystem is going to be the thing that differentiates one AMS from another in the future.
I think you really hit the nail on the head just talking about basic, I'm just going to sum it up as creature comforts, just basic user experience, basic usability, not having to log in through a server terminal. Michael in the comment mentioned that one of the issues they have is that technical debt, the topic we were starting before the live stream, which is there's so much new stuff happening in the industry and just with technology as a whole. at a certain point, it's just a matter of prioritization for them, and they can't do everything all at once. The reason I got clued in on this topic was because one of our friends, one of my now friends, his name's Judson Norton. He wrote a blog for us actually about the struggle he was having reconciling moving accounts from one carrier to another on the brokerage side, because it would always show up as a canceled when it really wasn't a canceled, and how does billing work? So he ended up going down this path where he had his agency management system over here, but then he actually built out his reporting in Power BI over here.
Mm-hmm.
And not that I wasn't aware you couldn't do that, but when I heard that, I was like, that's brilliant. You still have your central reporting and, your legal protection and your general creature comforts, but then on the executive, management level, when you're trying to just understand the basic things going on with your business, that the reports aren't accurate enough or satisfying, you now have this reporting solution that helps you get that level of detail that you need. And so what makes an agency management system so difficult to get right, not on the vendor side necessarily, but when you're adopting it as a agency, an MGA, you're a carrier, why is it so difficult to get it to work how we think it should work, or your team thinks it should work?
Yeah. So, what's funny is that, like, I will tell anybody who asks, my brain outputs in a neat little row of Christmas lights. I feel like everything should just do in this nice little row. And I don't care if you have like the Chevy Chase Christmas disaster going on in the back end. I want the pretty display. I have a friend who works in IT for a different industry, but he talks about the craziness of the network rooms. And I remember going into network rooms for the agency because something needed to be reset, and that's where it had to be. And you're not sure if you're detonating a bomb or if you're unplugging something. Like, it's a really terrifying space inside of every office, these crazy network rooms. But again, like, I'm thinking in neat little rows and Christmas lights, and I like everything to just be super structured from an interaction standpoint. But the truth is that all of the data looks like a network room. Regardless of what side of the equation you're on, when you talk about an AMS conversion or anything like that, we are working with complex sets of data that are built in different ways by different agency management system companies. And so when you go to like move from one to another, you're trying to move a basket of apples into a basket of oranges. And hopefully when your producers and service people sit down to work, that the output is exactly what they expected. But unfortunately, that's not the case. There's just too many of these little nuances. They might have been built on slightly different technologies. And so getting all of those things to marry and map it's a really complicated process, and it's not 100%. I don't know. I'd love to say that I know how it could be 100%. I'd love to think there are some nerdy kid in the basement that just wants to hack insurance technology, and he or she is figuring out how we can make that transition a little bit easier for every part of the industry. But unfortunately, it's just, you think every letter, commas, all of these little things, hyphenation messes up data transfers. Like, it's all of this crazy stuff that we kind of bypass when we're just working and doing our jobs and doing the thing that we need to do. But then when it comes to actually being able to move that data effectively, it creates some disruption. And so, yeah, it's just the complexity of data. And do I think it will get better and easier? Absolutely. But I also think that no one company has the answer to that. This is going to take cooperation of a lot of brain trust in the insurance community and probably outside of the insurance community to really make all of this stuff more effective and fluid as we move forward as an industry.
I think the complexity of data, especially from a user perspective, it's not something you think about very often because it's really not part of your job.
No.
And the scale of entering in one new policy holder into an agency management is completely different than exporting 10,000 people's worth of information into another system and trying to run them in parallel until your cutover date. Um, but I want to start getting into maybe some more actionable insights or actionable strategies for people that are on this call. And something that I know well from the world of large software implementations is when you're moving into a system, there will be limitations on how well that system fits your current processes. And so when you're using an agency management system and when you're thinking about adopting it and you're going through the implementation process, do you think you're most likely to be successful if you make the agency management system fit your existing processes, or if you try to adapt your processes to the specific agency management system and its workflow?
So I think it's a little bit of both. Again, going back to the fact that one AMS doesn't operate the same way that another AMS does. And so there's going to be a little bit of compromise. I'm not going to lie. No conversion goes off without compromise. It's like any good relationship. But I think understanding the core things that you need, either from a functionality or an output standpoint, and then understanding exactly how those things are going to look or sequence out in a new AMS is one of those things that you have to have a real understanding of, because it's that thing that your CSR does every single day. If it works differently or doesn't work correctly in the new AMS, you've just invested a lot of time and money into something that you're going to get resistance and complaints about every single day. And yes, they will eventually get used to it, but I think it's always going to be a little bit of like, hey, we need this thing to do this. And if we have to customize a workflow in order to, or customize some sort of mechanism within the AMS in order to complement this workflow, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that cost. But knowing at your core what the most important functions are allows you to have that understanding of how much are we going to have to give in on, and how much is this agency management system really working with our current process.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine it's hard on the smaller agency side because you don't necessarily have the skills or expertise to do that, right?
Yeah, you don't have a CTO on staff. You might have an owner and maybe some sort of manager or somebody in an assistant type of role, but you don't necessarily have a subject matter expert on staff. And so I think that making sure, still asking those critical questions, but also recognizing that there is outside expertise that you can hire to help bring you through that process. Our insurance industry is supported very heavily by consultants who have spent a lot of time in the trenches learning systems inside and out, understanding how agencies function. And so their breadth of knowledge really helps an agency move from one system to another with less pain than if they had to try and figure it all out on their own.
One thing I've noticed, and this isn't necessarily across the board, but I'm fairly confident in that it's more of like a law of averages, is that when people think about changing an agency management system, they're always trying to avoid as many costs as possible. And so what I've seen end up happening, speaking to companies that have gone through a 3-year transition between one major AMS to another, is they didn't deal with some of those upfront things that you were mentioning, right? Thinking through your processes, how you think it's going to be used, what's the critical path, what is the data that's accurate, and how might that translate between one system or the other? And so they end up purchasing an agency management system, and then they get stuck in the implementation. And then at that point, it's much more expensive to bring in an outside consultant, because then they're not necessarily choosing the best agency management system for their data and their process. They're trying to then force everything into this one system. And so maybe a solution for that would be, just understanding that you're going to have costs no matter what. And the more visibility you can get into that before you've actually signed a contract with the vendor, the less friction you'll have when you get to implementation and usage.
Yeah, absolutely. What do they say? Like, it's twice the price to have a contractor fix the mistake that they should have been fixed, like whatever that saying is. I feel like I should know it because I've heard it 100 times. DIYing doesn't always work. I mean, it just doesn't, if you don't have the expertise on staff. And also sometimes you just need an outside perspective, because I think it's easy to get sucked into the shiny object. Like a new system is not necessarily better, but if you're frustrated with what you have, you're like just grabbing at something, hoping, okay, well, this has got to be better than what we have because we're miserable with the system that we have. That's not necessarily the case, but putting that money in up front will save you time, money, stress, people, your most important resource in the long run, for sure.
So, have you ever encountered a situation where it was actually better to maybe make some changes in their existing agency management system than it was to go and procure a completely different system? I mean, is that ever a consideration? Like, let's invest in what we have rather than go buy something brand new?
I think that's always an important consideration. So if you talk to agency owners or even people that are kind of their lead experts within their organizations, they lead workflow development and technology initiatives and all of that kind of stuff. What's often the case is that agencies don't necessarily utilize all of the functionality. They haven't maximized on their current system. And so, or they haven't gone through the pain of figuring out what those limitations are. They just are like, hey, this didn't work the first time I tried it. It must not work. And so I think making sure that you understand what the limitations are. Have we used everything that we could have in this agency management system and it's still not serving our needs? Or is this just a matter of understanding a better way to use the system, or other integrations that we could potentially pull in that are going to help solve some of these problems rather than going through a massive conversion? So I think both, and sometimes both can be true, like, hey, it's just time for us to move on. But I think going through that evaluation process and making sure you understand what your current AMS is able to provide and what the true shortcomings are will help guide that decision. Because again, you're just going through this process of getting a better understanding of what's most important to not only serving the current purpose of your agency, but also getting you to those goals that you have as an organization 5, 10, 15 years down the line.
I want to hone in on something you just said because it relates to a topic that Michael posted in the chats about having a robust API so that your agency management system is focused on core operations, your book of business, and then you're pulling in these other functionalities from perhaps specialists. How often in this day and age is it where an agency management system owner, an owner of an agency, an MGA, a carrier will say, hey, I want to connect to this third-party system because of X, Y, and Z, and my agency management system won't allow me? Is that commonplace?
It's still more common than I think it should be in 2022. I think there's still a little bit of that. We got to protect our borders. We want to protect our client base. We don't want to give all this functionality away, or they already have tech initiatives where they're working on building certain functionality. And so I think there's a lot of different reasons why that happens, but also just like, in my mind, again, my Christmas light mind, APIs should be a little more like structured, but I know that that's not the case because we're dealing with different functionality, different sets of information and data, different data sources, all of that kind of fun stuff. But I do think that as cloud-based systems become the only option, as systems like Salesforce become much more commonly used, I do think we're going to see that API roadmap from every carrier and from these third-party vendors just become much more commonplace. So it's not going to be a big discussion. There may be some conversation about setup and other infrastructure things to help support those API loads, but I do think that it's the direction that we're moving. The progress has not been as quick as I really think it should have been, but I do think that there are a lot of tech initiatives in all parts of the industry that are putting a focus on those APIs.
And when you're speaking with someone or you're coaching them through, do we enhance what we have? Do we just use it to its full capabilities, or do we maybe go out and switch? How important is that open API connectivity, is that, or should it be a key driver, a consideration of how these people are procuring their agency management system, using it, thinking about it?
I think it's always an important consideration because it is going to be much more of the way that insurance information is transferred in the future. So whether or not all of that functionality exists on June 23rd, 2022, is it important? Absolutely. What their technology roadmap looks like to accommodate this in the future is even more important. So just making sure that they're putting themselves in a position to start letting all of those connections roll in. There's a lot of, like we've talked about, the technology debt load that these carriers are, or that these agency management systems are dealing with. Carriers are dealing with it as well. But, as they rebuild, part of it is just being thoughtful about the way that they choose to rebuild and making sure that they're prepared to really leapfrog technology a little bit and not, baby step through it, but really say, okay, we have to support the technology that's going to be required of us in 2023 and 2030. So I think just knowing that they're being thoughtful about what that experience looks like in the future is probably more critical than exactly what it does today. Because not everything is connected that way. So, but as those connections grow outside of the AMS world needs to be ready to respond and support.
And I think an interesting facet of what you just mentioned, Olivia, is that not all of the APIs you may want to connect to exist today.
Right.
Right. And so if you only are looking at the current ecosystem and the technology landscape, you're actually arbitrarily limiting yourself, because what if something comes out in 6 months? What, at what point, or do you see there ever being a point where, organizations say, I'm done with these agency management systems, I'm just going to go make Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics work for me? Or is there an inherent value in that agency management system and its ecosystem?
Yeah, so I'll say a couple things and hopefully not get myself in hot water with the I think agency management systems are always going to be around. They do have to think about evolving their purpose within the insurance ecosystem. They can't just, like when I started, it was like, this is your CYA system. Make sure that this is documented in case you ever get sued. Like that's what they taught you in licensing school. Like if it wasn't documented, it didn't happen, and therefore, like, good luck in front of a judge. Like that was kind of like the fear tactic. And so I think just like the general way that people think about how the AMS can actually serve the agency channel has changed. If we think about how that has changed over the last 15 years. But I think as long as Accord continues to be the standard, AMSs support that. It's actually a big financial cost if a agency management system went and tried to get an Accord contract on their own. That was kind of my last understanding of it. But also building out a Salesforce system, customizing that to make it work for an insurance agency is a lot more money than people have any idea about. It's like a Salesforce architect is $250 an hour minimum. And Salesforce starting out is just this giant thing that serves a lot of purposes. They're trying to serve every industry in the world. So then when you try and just parse out the things that are most critical and customize, all of the little parts of Salesforce to actually match what an insurance agency needs to operate and be functional and meaningful to their clients, you're talking about way more hours than you could even anticipate in order to make that happen. People have done it. I do think there are agencies out there that have done it, but you have to have some pretty significant cash in the bank in order to start building that. But there are AMSs that are being built on Salesforce because they believe in that infrastructure and how it allows them to be much more flexible and nimble when it comes to customizations and evolving as an AMS.
And one of the reasons I wanted to ask that is because I was on the Power Producers podcast with David Carruthers and Kyle Huak the other day. and you made a comment they just spend $450,000, on their HubSpot.
Mm-hmm.
We use HubSpot, and I was like, wow, whew, like I can't imagine spending $500,000 getting additional functionality. And I know the insurance use case is so much more complex than most people realize because you take it for granted. And so, what I've always heard is if you've really explored the limitations and they are truly there, at that point it might make sense to go down that sort of customization road, but you better be willing to support those customizations year in, year out, because what people don't realize is when they go outside of the standard offering of that vendor is not maintaining that. And if things break or no longer serve your purpose, you have to go and pay that consultant to come back in and rejigger the whole thing. And so it's definitely not a consideration that most people take lightly, or maybe they should give it a little bit more attention before they do. But I'll be curious to hear from some of these folks over the next 2 to 3 years how the work they had done, the customizations, have worked for them, and if they think it has given them, a competitive edge, lower cost of doing business, fewer headaches for my team and I, because it finally fits what I have been asking for all along. And so that's interesting. I'm glad we were able to cover that topic for the people that are going to listen to this call and think maybe I shouldn't just buy Microsoft Dynamics and start tweaking it.
I mean, you can get exactly what you want in those situations, but you still have to understand, like, every single system that exists in the world has limitations. There is no perfect system. Even if you have it customized to the hill, there's still going to be limitations that exist within that. And sometimes even, like I spent a little time in Salesforce. I think it's extremely powerful, but also other parts of the ecosystem aren't prepared to support Salesforce. So you might be ahead of the curve, but then you're still talking about some manual rework on the back end because carriers aren't working well with Salesforce or something like that. So I think it really does take this combined effort of everybody trying to move forward in order for the really super tech of the future to work effectively.
So the real question here then becomes, I think, should companies strive to have a single, system, only an agency management system, or is there a world in which they can adopt best-in-class software, even if that means having multiple systems?
Yeah, I think it's always going to be multiple systems. Agency management systems are going to serve a lot of purposes and have a lot of functionality, but it's never going to be everything. And again, going back to the whole idea of customizing a non-insurance system like Salesforce, it's not always going to be the functionality in the way that you want it. And so, even if you have one system, you don't love the accounting system, so you decide to plug in a QuickBooks or something like that. As long as it supports those integrations, I think is much more important than trying to make everything work inside a core AMS. Really just having the flexibility that you can integrate and do some customization work without building from the ground up is going to be the best bet.
We talk now about, it's now in the common language, like Zoom fatigue, death by Zoom, death by too many virtual meetings. I've also started to hear people refer to things like death by too many portals, death by too many systems. So where's the balance there?
Yeah, so the balance is in the APIs, honestly. The portal hell is a real thing. I remember being in an agency and having to learn how to rate and navigate and look up billing and coverage forms on 15 to 20 different websites, and then bringing new people into the office and being like, okay, I'm going to teach you how to use all of these systems. That's insane. Like, it shouldn't be so hard. I remember when carriers would brag about having the best portal, and at first it was like, oh yeah, that's amazing. And then it was like, wait, why does your portal have to be different? Why does your website have to be so different? Because in all reality, I'm going to an insurance carrier's website to do the same thing every single time. Look up billing, look up policy forms, find a contact person at a carrier. Like the core functionality of a carrier website is the same over and over and rate a policy, whatever it is. And so really just being able to push a button and move information quickly from your AMS where you've already entered it or a third party has dropped data in and push it into that system and get what it is that you want, that's the future of insurance. That instant response, rather than logging in, changing your password 100 times while you're on the phone with the customer, like that's not the nightmare that we should be going through in 2022. So I do believe that instantaneous response is where efforts need to be focused. And that's going to be the thing that allows insurance agents to gain back market share, because we're seeing this in non-independent agent sectors of the insurance industry. And so we got to bring that into our fold.
We got to push on it a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Something I've always wondered is, there's 450,000 insurance professionals in the US. And I know not all of them are independent agents, right? But probably about half, I've heard like half of them are. And so I just wondered if, 200,000 people stood up at the same time and said, you carriers, we're not doing this anymore. Give us an API. I imagine that would happen pretty quick.
Yeah. So, because I've gotten to spend time, in different parts of the industry, part of that being on agency advisory councils. And I'm not gonna. I helped design some portals. I'm not gonna lie. That was the thing.
We won't hold it
when I was on
against
those boards. So I apologize to everybody. But there are carriers that are being thoughtful about this, and they have API roadmaps. And it starts super basic. It starts with clicking a billing button. But imagine how many billing transactions an insurance agency handles. And if they can push a button to complete that transaction within their AMS, have it documented, have the payment made, have a receipt shoot off to the customer. I mean, and you're talking about what used to take a bunch of back and forth and narrowing it down to a couple of minutes. And not only is your customer happier, but the people working in your office are happier. And so I think, as we see that evolve, I think it's smart for the carriers to start small and not say, oh yeah, we're going to load massive amounts of data via API, but really just starting with those small micro transactions that have a daily impact at the desk level. That's going to be the thing that serves the market the best.
One thing that always comes up when we talk about API and automatic transmission of data is data quality. Something we run into a lot. And I think at a certain point, people just have to expect that their data will always have some level of inaccuracies. But the question that we always come back to is, and we get asked, whose responsibility is it, to maintain that data and have trust in that data? And is that something that you've experienced or can illuminate us on?
It's funny because nobody wants to be responsible for it, right? It's like, insurance customer, you need to read your policy. Insurance agent, you need to read the policy that you sold. Carrier, you need to make sure that you notify of any changes in policy forms. And so we're taught so much about risk transfer. And so data responsibility is not anything that anybody wants. We've managed to just kind of pass this buck back and forth for a long time. And then we started bringing in third-party data sources because it speeds up transactions. And that's not always accurate or 100%. And so then we griped about having to go back and verify data. And so I think it's just it's a constant battle. I think everybody's responsible for the data that they touch and make business decisions with. I don't care if you're the underwriter. I don't care if you're the agent. I don't care if you're the consumer. If a consumer doesn't correct the address on their policy, it's on you. You have a policy, you've paid for it. But so everybody's responsible for part of it in the chain. But yeah, I know nobody necessarily wants to take ownership of it.
It's a hot potato.
Yes, it is. It's like, now I've delivered this policy to you. You've confirmed receipt, and now this is your baby. But I do think everybody just taking a bigger piece of ownership I'd rather have 2 people verify data than 0 people verify data. So that's always going to be a thing. I don't know that we'll get to a point where that's not necessary. Technology and humans, it's still, there's still going to be errors. So it doesn't matter who looks at it. I think getting used to hazard checking that stuff. And I know there's technology out there that is, looking for those errors in the data sets and things like that. And so technology is going to help with that a lot. But then once that information is given to an agent, like, hey, these are the problems that exist. Either your policy forms don't match, data from the customer doesn't match, whatever that is, then somebody has to be responsible for rectifying. And it's always going to be the receiver of the information.
Yeah. One thing I've always been impressed with are agencies or principals or owners that are so proactive about their data. And they're the ones that really are, I think, helping set best practices for the industry as a whole, because then, their staff who experience that eventually will go on to another agency, and then it's that slow matriculation of that institutional knowledge throughout. And so I've always found that really admirable when they can ingrain that as just a core value of doing business.
Yep.
We're going to make sure our data is correct and it's complete. The other question I always get when it comes to data is, there's infinite information on the policy form. And so what information should we be collecting in the agency management system? And how does that factor into things like transitioning between agency management systems or using APIs or third-party plugins? Like, how have you thought about that?
I think every system has a different perspective, right? They have a different thing that they're looking for. And so the agency management system, I think, is always going to have the most data, which I know makes it labor intensive and higher maintenance and all of that kind of stuff. But a rating system wants different information. The billing system wants different information. So the AMS really is designed to interact with all of those different functions and outputs. And so, yeah, I mean, what's the minimum necessary? That's kind of hard to say, but I think, wherever you can source that data and then, collect it and keep it accessible, within the agency management system, I think is what's important. But I do think third-party data sources are only going to become more extensive than what they are now. So
it sounds like what you're really advocating for in an agency management system is a single source of truth.
Yes. So, I talked to an agency owner once that was toggling between 2 agency management systems, using both. He liked certain functions in one and other functions in another. And I said, which one's your source of truth? I don't have one. If I hadn't had a source of truth to rely on when I was, in the service role or managing a team, I think I would have been nauseous. Like, it would have been really hard for me to sleep at night. So I think maintaining that set of information and the integrity of it is absolutely, a responsibility of being in this industry.
Mm-hmm. And I think, when we think about the bare minimum of getting an agency management system to work for you, right? I mean, that's the theme of this webinar. If you don't have a single source of truth, you then have no idea if it's working for you.
Right.
And it's overlooked because it tends to fall to clerical. The problem is it tends to be thought of as a clerical task, but it really isn't, because
Right.
it's so core to operations and all the decision making that's going on.
Yeah. I mean, if you can, like your contact who's using Power BI, but that information is coming from somewhere, right? And so, yeah, I mean, it may be a feeder to other pieces of technology, but it also has to be salient in order for anything that you output into any other system to be worth anything.
Yeah. So I want to just kind of take a step back to the future, if you will. And so something going on right now when it comes to agency management systems is there are so many new agency management systems that are popping up everywhere. Native tech stack, built on top of a platform like Salesforce. And so when might, and help us kind of think through this, because it is kind of a two-part question. When might a newer, smaller agency management system be a better choice over a well-established, legacy one, in air quotes? And kind of what are some of the trade-offs that you normally think about between the two?
So, when you talk about newer agency management systems are in high development cycles. And so as long as you're used to, or you're willing to tackle constant evolving functionality, then a newer, more tech-focused, cloud-based or Salesforce-based agency management system could very well be the right thing for you. But just know there's a learning curve, and it's a constant learning curve, I think, when it comes to these newer solutions. But when you think about the smaller AMS companies are out there versus the big ones that everybody knows and recognizes, there's nothing wrong with either one of them, right? Like, I mean, they have their flaws, but philosophically, they're serving the industry, they're serving a purpose. I think that sometimes the development cycles at a large AMS company might actually be slower than those of a small AMS company. They're just a little more focused, and so they have a smaller client base that they're dealing with, typically, all of that kind of fun stuff. And I think that you also have this opportunity with smaller AMS companies to potentially have a larger influence on how they evolve their product. And so it's kind of that big fish, small pond theory. If you can leverage more with your AMS company, that might be the right way to go. But if you feel like, hey, we just want these pre-built solutions, we want to have all of the resources within the company and all of that kind of stuff, then a larger firm might be the right place to be. So I think there's different philosophies. You have to know what it is that's important to you as a business.
Yeah. Is there ever a situation where you've seen it, like, and I know, talking less philosophically but more functionality, have you ever seen an example where just there's a clear cut, like, apples to apples comparison, this lets us bind policies faster than this system? Or is it at this moment more like UI and API connectivity? Like, what are really differentiating all of these different players?
Yeah, so some agency management systems honestly are dictated by business type. One's more friendly to commercial lines versus personal lines. And some of it is more of that, hey, we've been building the infrastructure to be able to plug into carrier systems and allow for, I know real time is actually like a trademarked term, but I don't know what else to use. But we allow rating platforms so that you can expedite the quoting process and all of that kind of fun stuff. So I think that there are different considerations, but knowing, I think if you're a PL focused agency, don't go with the AMS that's saying, like, we really cater well to commercial lines type policies and all of the vendors in that ecosystem. You're gonna be miserable.
I mean, it's interesting that you said that, because you almost brought us back full circle, which is, if you don't understand your requirements, how can you know what to buy?
Yes, exactly. And I think that it's so easy to get impatient in the process, or assume that the next iteration of the system that you're on is the right one for you, and just to kind of go with the flow. But I think, it is a really a matter of what's most important to you as a business now, in the future. What can you not live without? I can't tell you how many times, like, say a department like accounting gets left off of a demo call, and then it turns out accounting doesn't work real well in this system. Guess what's core to the functionality of an insurance agency? Accounting. And if we've now not understood how that's going to impact the business, it's like hot water, super hot water.
What, just to kind of start wrapping this up, and then we'll turn it over to some questions that are on the YouTube live stream, and then any that our audience on this call have. When does it make sense? So to move to the cloud, and does it matter what cloud you're on? That's also a question I've started to hear.
Oh man, like I didn't even know there were multiple clouds. So somebody's gonna have to educate me on that. But I know that there's a little bit of I know IT people that like to maintain control. And so going to the cloud means relinquishing some of that. The on-prem server, I'll go and take my wrench and fix it type of mentality is one of those things that's hard to give up if that's something that you've been used to. But I think that the cloud 9 times out of 10 is going to be the right decision. You're supported better, I think, in those cases. Your backups are a little more solid. It's less maintenance on the side of the agency. So I'm trying to think of scenarios where it doesn't make sense to be on the cloud. I think it can be a little bit, there could be some cost involved and things like that. But I think once you get those systems stood up, I think in general, it's much better for the agency. It actually allows your IT team to focus their efforts into other things for the agency.
Well, and if it makes anyone feel better, the CIA, the NSA, they're all on the cloud. So at least from a security point of view, that exists.
Yes, exactly. And it's like there was just such a huge, for anybody that didn't go to the cloud, I think the pandemic was a really fast pancake flip for all of those companies and organizations. Like you just had to do it. It helped support a remote workforce a lot better.
Well, I appreciate all of the time you took to answer those questions. A couple of audience questions now with our remaining time. One is, how do you deal with the hidden costs of an agency management system?
So there can be so many, right? Training dollars, training hours, all of that kind of stuff. I think, one of the things that, and for all those that don't know, I work with Steve Anderson every day, who has been in this world for so long. But one of the things is really you have to have this checklist of items, and the request for information should include how many hours of training is this going to involve? And then you need to calculate that over the salaries of every single employee. And then I would say probably double it, because you're going to have kind of this slowdown in terms of speed of response as they get used to another system. So I think when you think about budgeting for tech, you just have to look at all of these tiny little things that seem like they're not going to be super significant, and then actually start putting salary dollars next to every single one of those things, and just making sure that you have a budgetary plan for it. I'd love to say that there will be no surprises after that, but anybody that's been through a conversion can quickly tell you that sometimes you have turnover as a result. I don't know what the statistics are out there on turnover after a conversion, but I would say most agencies lose at least one person during a conversion. And so I would account for that as well. But if I find a master document of things to consider, I will gladly share that out.
Absolutely. Well, I would love to see that too. A question from the live stream too. It sounds like this person is a little frustrated because they're not the decision maker. And the question is, how can you effectively persuade an owner, a manager, someone like that, that maybe there needs to be a change with the agency management system because what used to work isn't working anymore?
Yeah. Functionality changes all the time. We see that over and over. I think really putting together a business case of this is how I used to do the process. This is how I have to do it now. This is how much longer it's taking. And this is how many times I do it per day. And then once you start building a business case about the frustration of daily tasks, I think that it's a compelling argument every single time. But just know that just because one agency management system stops doing that, it doesn't mean that there's a fix somewhere else. So I understand how that can be super frustrating. They move a button and it takes you it feels like 20 years to remember where they put that button. Like, definitely been there. Those can be frustrating times. But really, I think anytime you can start putting dollars and cents but next to functionality, you're typically going to get the attention of whoever's helping guide those technology decisions in your company.
And last question from our live stream. Is there any place you recommend to go to find out about insurance APIs, integrations? Because there's just so many.
Oh boy. I don't, I wish I did. I'm going to put that on the Catalyst roadmap though. So thank you for suggesting it. I think that there's people in my network that are so much more well-versed in what's out there for APIs. And some of it's really specific to a carrier and what they're prioritizing, or specific function of a separate piece of tech. And generally, an agency management system website is going to also give you some ideas of what they can plug in and things like that. But as for like a central location to really get a high level view of all of this information, I don't know of one. But Colby, if I find it, I will definitely let you know. I have a call right after this with the team, so I will definitely be asking.
Excellent. Well, it was amazing having you, Olivia. Thank you for being so gracious with your time, answering the questions from the webinar and our audience questions. It's been a pleasure. And have a wonderful rest of your day. I mean, we're wrapping it up, folks. Exit stage left. So thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you, Colby. It was fantastic. I appreciate the time.